Welcome back. Just before I hand it over to Cliff and move into lessons learned, I just want to kind of catch up with where we are so far. Today is going to be a lot about what have we learned. Hopefully we've done an okay job of defining what we call the challenge and the opportunity. Like, we're not getting it right yet. We can get it right. We've seen how to get it right. There's a whole bunch of things we've got to do. And what we've charged Cliff with is with a panel of what we consider to be kind of big thinkers who've been there, done that through this space. So they've got between them decades of experience around here to really step back from the fray and talk about what are the big things. You know, we have 100 ideas, but what are the 10 that if everybody gets this right, we're going to get in the right place? Remind everybody that I after that, I'm going to do the very best I can to kind of pull those thoughts together, but put it in the context again of the climate crisis. Like, we started with a climate crisis, and I want to come back to that because it's a big deal. You know, it's been a slow burn, I guess, and I mean that literally. But we know it's getting worse every year, and we know it will get worse, and just want to kind of reconnect with that and the special role that healthcare plays within what's happening to our climate, what we're doing to the climate. So that's a big deal, but this is all about action. So if you were thinking of trying to beat the traffic, I'd encourage you to stay right till 3 o'clock, because those final thoughts, I think, are the key ones. What are you taking away from here that you can do tomorrow? And if everybody takes away something to do tomorrow, especially if you do it together, we have a real chance of licking this thing because we are running out of time. So we'll come back to that. The very first thing you need to do is have a Greening Healthcare 20th anniversary cookie, just so you know. Every one of our team has one of these every 3 months, and that's the starting point to inspiration to start actually making improvements. They are actually quite delicious, and your kids will love them. So, and sorry, we don't want to take them home. So grab a cookie. So let me pass this over to Cliff. I say an exceptional panel. We tried to get the designer, the owner, and the operator, facility manager, together at the executive level, again, to really step back, be brave enough to step outside the box and say, this is what's working really, really well. This is what's not working, and these are the most important things. I couldn't ask for anybody better than Cliff to moderate this and draw out the big understandings, the big truths. I'm going to keep getting my steps in, and I'll have the microphone in the back. And I do encourage everybody, as you hear something that resonates with you, well, it doesn't sound quite right, put your hand up. I'll bring the microphone over and push these guys, because we need to get outside the box. We need to have new original thoughts, and we need to get the priorities straight. So Cliff, it over to you, and thanks for doing this.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. I always, whenever I'm involved in these, I always feel I take away much more than I give. And I'm absolutely sure today will be exactly the same with the great panel that we have in front of us. And just a quick introduction. So I'm Cliff Harvey. I'm a joint VP with St. Mary's and Grand River Hospitals in Kitchener-Waterloo. I'm responsible for the redevelopment of the new hospital as the two organizations come together. But my job here is to moderate, and so I'm going to pass it to each of the individuals just to introduce themselves. And you've got a mic there if you want to grab it.
Hello. Okay, good. Anthony Palesci, I work at WSP. I'm part of the climate change, resilience, and sustainability team there. We do those things that I just said. My role has been to support the decarbonization of buildings for my whole career, which started actually this week 20 years ago. So, and that picture there is a little old, so obviously. I actually, when that picture was taken, I was working on, at least at that time, 4 P3 healthcare projects, and I was the energy and modeling lead. So that's where I started. Nowadays, most of my work is to help plan for decarbonization in buildings, including healthcare buildings as a focus. So I'll talk a little bit about that and give some controversial thoughts about that. But I'm excited to be part of this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm David Longley, SVP for Capital Planning Redevelopment at Trillium Health Partners. I didn't make the slide. I'm not sure what to make of that, but anyway, very happy to be here leading the redevelopment of our Mississauga Hospital site, as well as a major addition at our Queensway Health Centre site. So hopefully I can offer some insights for you today.
I'm Colin Flock. I'm the SVP of Elliston Facility Services. So we run 9 active P3s now. The hospitals are all the ones in the middle there that aren't Humber River or Mackenzie Vaughan. And so I will talk about lessons learned, obviously. I have the unique pleasure of opening Oakville many years ago and seeing the energy not be what we thought it was going to be. So I think it'll be an interesting conversation.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm John Marshman. I'm the Vice President of Capital Facilities and Business Development for South Lake Regional. Prior to that, I had the pleasure of working with Colin as Associate Vice President of Facility Operations, William Osler, with Colin at Brampton, and also with Patrick in his former life at Peel. I guess I'm, although my role has evolved, I think I'm here sort of representing the operations side of the house, and how we have to, bat cleanup in a way to all these grand visions in design as they actually try to make them work. I was looking and I was thinking it's somehow my hair has got darker, but my beard has got grayer. So I'm not quite sure how that worked, but I'll pass it back.
Great, thank you. And thank you for participating. So the first sort of question that I'm going to put forward, and I'm going to pick up some of the themes. And one of the themes that came out this morning was, we're doing good. The work that we're doing, when we look at the new hospitals particularly that are coming out, we are moving the needle and we're moving forward. So, but part of that is, of course, you can't be complacent. You need to get better. So I always use what I call the 80-20 rule, which is 80% of what we do is standardized. It's building on best practices, it's guidelines, it should be part of the education process. 20% of what we should be doing is focusing on how we get better at this. And if we do this on each and an individual project and then share those lessons, the whole system will get better together. And I think that's significant because we can't reinvent the wheel every single time and we'll never get anywhere. No comment on the ministry process there, but the idea here is the question would be for the panel, starting with the end in mind, what is the problem that you're trying to solve today based upon lessons learned from previous projects? So, Antonio, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, it's cool. I love coming to these events because I'm not as involved in the construction and operations side of the work anymore, mostly on PDC and early design work. But closing the loop of what's been successful is essentially what this is about and what we're trying to do, which is so awesome that you guys do this. I think that everything we've talked about till now is the 80% of how we can address decarbonization of new buildings, right? Like we talked about making them efficient. We talked about addressing, aligning with all of the opportunities that exist to optimize those buildings given the way we're setting targets. The 20%, and maybe I'll touch on this later, is how do we make those new buildings decarbonized, like actually zero carbon, or plan for them to be zero carbon. I actually don't think it's that hard. But the real 80% of decarbonization isn't the new construction sector. Hopefully everyone gets that. The real 80% is all of the existing hospital and healthcare buildings. That's the problem we need to address if we want to address decarbonization, if we want to meet the zero carbon by 2050 goal. So focusing on the 20% that is new build, or even less, because new builds only add to emissions, they don't reduce them, even if they are zero carbon-ish, right? So the 80% is the existing stock. But of course, we're not necessarily here to talk about that in detail today. But what I would add is that what we're trying to learn is that the new build process brings money, focus from everyone, including the ministry, everyone on the team, the executive. All of that work brings the new builds bring those people to the table, which is great. So how can we leverage that process to make the existing buildings follow suit and achieve faster decarbonization as part of that new development process? So what I would put out there is this question, and we have some ideas of how to solve that problem in work we're doing with some clients, but it's very early days and there isn't really an obvious funding stream for that, right? Thinking about how to plan for decarbonizing all of our facilities while we are thinking about how to build that new building. For those who have campus buildings, it should be a no-brainer, right? It makes total sense. We're building this whole new giant building in the middle of our campus where we will add heat pumps and other improved technologies that could also serve the rest of our buildings. I mean, that's a very simplified way of thinking about it, but that should be pretty obvious. For those who have separate sites, the things that, like where it's a greenfield site and you're focused on how you repurpose your other buildings, the bigger hospital economics question is, how do we do all of this cost effectively if zero carbon is our goal as an organization, if it is the goal of the ministry, if it is the goal of society to do this, how do we make that plan and align the new construction work with decarbonization for our assets? So that would be my pitch, is like, can we do that? What are the mechanisms for that? Can we do it cost effectively? And can we plan for it now while we're planning for these bigger holistic new construction projects? So there's a put out there.
Perfect, excellent. David, your problem that you're trying to solve for.
There's a lot of great points just made, and I didn't write them down. So the first problem I'm trying to solve for is remembering all of the things that that were just mentioned. I heard the new projects bring money and focus. I think that's true. I think one of the big challenges is getting that money and that focus aligned where we want it to be aligned. These projects are, when we talk about new build projects, goes without saying, they are incredibly complicated. They take a very long time, many of them, in the neighborhood of 20 years from start to finish. Over the span of that 20 years, you will be advocating for all kinds of different things. And so there is only so much capital, be it actual capital, political capital, influence to expend. And so I think alignment on incentives, and I'll probably use the word incentives a lot. What are we incentivizing in new capital, new build projects? I think a lot of that goes back to our government partners and what is being prioritized and incentivized. Again, there's so many compromises to be made, so many decisions to be made along the journey of getting these projects into the ground and out of the ground, that I think if we don't have the right incentives at the highest level and the right expectations at the highest levels, that all of the good work that that we do can still be very difficult to realize. I would argue that in some circumstances it may actually be easier looking at existing stock. Some of the opportunities around existing stock might actually be less complicated to deliver some projects than on the full replacement projects, even though there is budget and there is focus on these new projects. There are times where I would much rather deal with our existing stock and hospitals that don't have a major project going on. Some of the circumstances and the context around those projects actually make them simpler to deal with in terms of being able to work with market partners and other funding opportunities to decarbonize and make those projects more efficient. So again, as much as the big projects do have budget and do have focus, those budgets and that focus is not always necessarily where we'd want it to be. And frankly, it needs to be in 20 and 30 different places at the same time. So those are compromises that need to be considered.
Excellent, thank you. Colin.
That was a lot. I'm not sure how to follow that. I'm going to change a little bit. So the problem I think I'm trying to solve as an operator is staffing. So I think somebody spoke on one of the panels about how, engineers, whether they're design engineers or engineers and building operators, how do we find, people who understand how a building runs and be able to run that efficiently? And, a bunch of years ago when I took a leadership role at EDFS, we really focused on how do we hire a bunch of really smart people that want to show up in a hospital at 2 a.m. and plunge toilets, while also making sure that the building's running as efficiently as possible. And so we made a shift a couple of years ago on, okay, well, there's a few of those people, but not a lot of them. So how do we get the technology in the hospitals and infrastructure to give people information to feed to them how to run the building and allow them to not have to know absolutely everything? We're asking a lot of the staff on site to be customer service representatives, understand clinical operations, be very friendly to all the clinical operations people that are within the hospital in the middle of the night, plunge toilets, and then also run the building. And so we're really focused on how do we get the technology and the smarts, whether that's artificial intelligence or machine learning or all those buzzwords, or just programming BAS appropriately so it's making good decisions and giving them the information so they can make good decisions. That's a problem.
Excellent. Thank you. Don.
Yeah, I was thinking that actually batting cleanup would be the easiest role but in fact, it's probably the hardest. I think some really brilliant points made. Anthony, this point around, and I think the bulk of this room is really focused around new projects and new builds because that's where the opportunity presents itself. But the 80% and the elephant in the room is that there are really, there's a pastiche of funding opportunities that it's not very well coordinated to really enable the kind of decarbonization initiatives that we really need to undertake with some of these existing facilities. And I think building on that, and I think your point around the myriad of tensions and decisions and the limited amount of political capital that we actually have to expend within these projects makes it, and it's not our core business to decarbonize. It's our core business to make sick people better, and we don't have enough money, and we don't have enough space, and we don't have enough care. So when it comes to balancing that political capital, it's really, really challenging to allow that balance to really support decarbonization when push comes to shove in those difficult spots in projects. And so, as I was thinking through this, it's, how do we I think a lot of it falls on our shoulders, and it can't because we don't have the right mechanisms to be able to drive this. So how do we look outside our current structures to advocate for, as you said, standards? We really need this stuff to be fixed parameters that are not negotiable to a point that leaves our political capital for the things that we actually are going to ultimately have to spend it on. But I think in terms of the problem, taking off that hat and putting on my hat on the facility operations side of things, I think that the problem that I've consistently experienced in every P3 that I've worked through is the disconnect between the design vision and the actual guys on the ground who have to operate these systems, and how can we better engage the operations team in the visioning of these projects to be able to actually, ultimately land in a scenario where, other than what is the typical scenario where you have a service provider that doesn't fully understand or isn't fully resourced to be able to implement what was actually envisioned.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was great. It's exactly what I thought, which was everybody has a different problem, which is one of the issues when we do lessons learned is like, what are we trying to take away from these different problems? One of the things though, and I'm going to, Amir earlier today in the panel, used the analogy of bifocals, which unfortunately I'm waiting for my first pair to come through. But I thought it was excellent because for me, I have to put glasses on to see far away. So that's why I can't see anybody out there. So if you're falling asleep, that's okay. But I also have trouble now reading close up. So one of the things is, and I think it goes to some of these problems we're talking about. You talked about political capital. What are we trying to solve the problem for? Well, we're trying to build a hospital to deliver services. We're not trying to decarbonize the world from that perspective. But we all recognize that we all have to do our part from that. Lessons learned. What would be a takeaway that you would offer in your roles, and because you all have different leadership roles, to say, how do you convey to people to be able to see far away? Well, the truth is you're working on a project right here that has to be on time, on budget, and be delivered to do healthcare. But we're trying to look in the future and solve some big problems. And I'll start and give you time to think about it, because guess what? That wasn't one of the questions I shared with them. But the idea here is one of the things that we did in South Niagara was we did a resiliency a report that looked at what's happening in 2050 and what's happening in 2080. And when we looked at the climate change and the heating and cooling that we would have to have in our building, was phenomenal. And we're doing something similar in Kitchener-Waterloo, where we're looking at the energy demand for decarbonization and the electrical load that we need on the building, which is completely blew up our energy provider in Kitchener-Waterloo, because he goes, you're just one of multiple industries that have to do this. So for us, it was like getting these reports done to say, this is what is waiting for us out here. If this is the problem we're going to solve, how are we going to solve this problem? Because it's real. And you guys, you will leave a legacy if we don't get that. But here we have to solve this problem today, and then we have all the issues that you have. So a lesson learned, like how do you get people to think out far enough that they can bring themselves back and solve that problem today? And since John looks so enthused about that question, I'll start with that end.
That was not enthusiasm. Are you trying to figure out what is he actually asking for?
So you're really, the question is how we get people incentivized to, within the structure that we work within, to.
But by the way, if you solve this problem, Ian's out of a job. So I
was just going to say that is kind of the elephant in the room problem. Does anybody have a quick answer that they want to jump on, or do you want me to vamp?
I have an answer, but you
Go first, and I'll follow you.
I don't think any of my answers there were quick, but so one of the things that I would advocate for is front-end loading. If there is a split between the planning design of a building and the execution of that building, I would not ask Project Co and the bidders to do lots of future thinking planning. As much as they are good at it, their job is to take a PA that's thousands of pages, digest it, understand its complexities, and compete against others for the most complex work in the country. And then you're going to ask them now to envision the future and offer innovative solutions beyond that, which are difficult for them to do. Right? It's actually very challenging. And I've been involved in it where I have folks from the PCL or Elliston team yelling at me because that particular idea isn't going to work, Anthony. We can't afford that, right? So I know I'm from the other side, have that experience. So the more you can do upfront in the earlier phases of the planning to think about life cycle cost implications, and specifically on the decarb problem, I would say that looking at what we call high COP options like heat pumps that use geoexchange or water, wastewater heat recovery, these other options in the context of their demand reduction benefit and their long-term energy cost savings benefit is a good thing to do up front, because you won't necessarily get, for the lowest cost, you won't get people recommending that technology because it's more expensive. So I think those are the kind of things that make sense to study up front. And then you can put that in a softer context. Now, if you're doing IPD or whatever, everyone's together, everyone's happy, maybe those options are on the table, but yeah, that's my recommendation.
Yeah, and I think I take away from that, and John, are you?
Yeah, no, just, I think that's bang on in terms of, obviously, the tensions that sit within the project agreement are going to drive you to the lowest common denominator. So obviously that, I think what you're saying is that you really need to do that pre-thinking. I would say it starts with some of what you were talking about in terms of actually doing the exercise to map out what is the impact of climate change on what we're going to design for, and then what technologies we might be looking at. But I think, and I think what you're talking about is, defining within the PSOS ultimately the outcome of that work, so that Project Go has to sit within a different box as they're doing their design. I think the elephant in the room question is, you have to get that concept and commitment past Infrastructure Ontario and be able to make that, advocate for that case, because that is going to cost more in the upfront. And so it's really, I think doing that groundwork, making that case, and then advocating for the, for those parameters within your PSOS, and acceptance that that's going to drive cost.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, part of the issue is cost. So you put it in the PSOS and say, this is where we want to go. And then the project company is going to come back and say, well, this is how much it'll cost. And now you've hit a ceiling. So that'll be the first thing to go. Right? But I think, I think your point, Cliff, is like, how do you get the teams even just thinking about that? So how do you get people to remove I'm just focused on today's problem and not thinking about the future and how it'll be affected? And I think you get the right people on the team, the right groups. I mean, I think the panel talking about this hospital that we're sitting in now, everybody, although there's tension, everybody's focused on the same goal. And I think we're starting to see, because the public awareness around decarbonization and energy reduction in your home life is important, then you're going to bring that to work. And so even if you put it in the PSOS and it has to get value engineered, people are going in the appropriate direction, and you're getting the most efficient facility that you want. I think the other piece, the early days of design in hospitals, and we talked about modeling earlier, energy modeling. It wasn't really a focus. If I think of like in the Oakville days, the model was important. It was part of the submission, but it was just something that the modelers did, and they took care of that. Now we know how to build an efficient hospital. We've seen examples like this one, and so all that sort of brain challenges that people have on the design side, that's taken care of. The 80% is done. So we can focus some of our energy on, well, what about the future? And maybe we can do maybe it's not the whole way there, but it gets us part of the way there in the right direction.
I'll just add that, in our experience, getting people excited, interested, concerned about this, thinking about it has not been a problem. Our consultants are engaged, our builders are engaged, our medical staff is engaged, our public's engaged, everyone's engaged, and there's very little, misalignment in that regard. So that's really helpful. I think a couple of you have said it. It comes down to capital. I think we're focusing a little bit here on a DBFM model. I'll say that I'm not sure the model makes that much difference in terms of what the challenges are here. I think the challenge is capital. I think even under the DBFM, where there's, in theory, there's an FM component, there's a long-term operating component, it comes down to upfront capital in our experience. And so whether you're in a BF or a DBF or a DBFM or a traditional STIP sum, I think those are the challenges. The challenge is capital. But I will say that we've seen or are seeing tremendous energy and enthusiasm in this. Again, our medical staff is activated, as they often are. Our public, is activated. Are in the process of tearing down what people call some perfectly good buildings in order to create a footprint to build a new one. Not ideal, was not ideal from the beginning. It's getting attention, and I'm glad it's getting attention. We made the decision purposefully. It was the best sort of overall decision, but we made it knowing that some people would look at it and say, why are you tearing down a perfectly good building? Look at all that waste. Look at all that additional carbon, essentially, that's being expended to do this. Very fair point. But again, it was made with a sort of a bigger picture in mind. But again, we're glad that our consultants are engaged on this. Our builders, our development partners engaged on this. Love that there's lots of tension in the room. There's never perfect agreement as to what the right answer is. There's a lot of art, I think, in this. just as there's a lot of art in ultimately determining approvals for a project, back to the idea that this is largely upfront capital. All of these projects have different lifespans. They have different local political contexts, local context in terms of the service need, lots of different pressures on them. And so ultimately how final decisions are made around budget and how final decisions are made around what's included and what's excluded is a lot of art. So it is not a perfect science. It's not a formula where we can sit here and say, this is how we did it. Go and do the next one like this and you will get what you want. The next one might have to play by a different set of rules for all kinds of different reasons. Again, lots of enthusiasm, lots of energy. The ultimate decision around capital and what's being incented, I think is what it comes down to.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yep.
Yeah. So I just want to pick up on what you guys just said, because I think that there is also this idea, which people probably have heard of transition planning, right? So I think, Colin, that's kind of what you were saying is like, and maybe you're saying, maybe we can't get all the way there in the current capital instantiation, but what are the, and the CAGBC has done a good job of advocating for this idea through the zero carbon building standard of like, well, at least have a plan on how you're gonna, and that can be something embedded. I think it's starting to be the case that this is embedded in the ask, right, which is great. And so I think that honoring that, not making it a paper exercise, but actually saying, no, we want to know what it's going to cost, where the space is, that you did the electrical site servicing properly, and that we're going to be ready to add quickly and easily and shift away from use, and our existing boilers become the backup, et cetera. These kind of ideas should be part of the planning, right? And I think that's a good thing that we can all do if we want that to work, right? And then I would suggest that for the builders who are signing into long-term operating contracts, or in the progressive P3 model where it's, where we're going to stay around for 30 years, not disincentivizing them to be the people who help deliver that transition and make money from it. Like making sure that it's okay for it to just be that same operator in the building, and maybe there's a way, there can be competitiveness issues with that, but maybe there is a way for it to be like, you can see it as an opportunity, not a burden on you to have that transition plan. Like, I think those are opportunities. Like, I think that's good. Like, that's something that's easy, in quotes, easy to do. Maybe not always every time though. So.
Cliff, could I pick up on this issue of the problem is capital? And may I also again invite everybody in the room. This is the most interactive part of the day, so don't hesitate, put your hand up. I need the exercise to come and see you. I'm very troubled by the contention that it's a capital problem because it makes it somebody else's problem. So as the government doesn't give us enough money, so therefore all of those hospitals that are underperforming from an energy efficiency standpoint, not my fault. I think that's the opposite of the theme we're coming in today. I believe that there are certainly capital issues. There's nothing like designing a building and building it 10 years later and hoping the budget's going to hang in there. Probably won't. But I very much doubt that it's the energy features that are causing the problem. There's inflation, there's all kinds of other things. I think the key issue here today is I don't believe there's any cost difference, time adjusted, between the most efficient and the least efficient hospitals in terms of original construction. And we know that they're spending $30-something million a year more on utilities across 37 hospitals than they should be. And it's going to take a lot of effort from everybody here to get them back on track. So help me a little bit with why is it a capital issue as opposed to a process issue and a team issue?
So I'll answer. Hopefully, I won't speak on everyone else, but they can just nod if they. So I wasn't speaking to. I think energy efficiency, absolutely. Like, we have the capital, we know how to do it. Everybody knows how much it costs, roughly. It was. I think Cliff's question was like the future. So what happens in 2080? Like, the climate has changed. I need a bigger chiller. How do I design for that? So that was really that's the piece that I think, and I think that was the piece that Anthony was talking about is, if you put that in an output spec, the builders are going to say, like, yikes, I don't know, and it's going to be really expensive, or my equipment's oversized. But then I think the intention is, if everybody's thinking like that, maybe the design changes slightly so that we have that transition planning. And if everybody in the team is thinking that way, we have that ability to make the changes when we need to make the changes. But the efficiency, I don't think anybody here is saying that that part is a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Oh. I mean, if you want to join the panel, you're more than welcome. We don't have your picture, but no.
Yeah, I know I have a comment on future weather file and how to utilize them in our new hospitals. So, for example, we are now considering the future weather file in our design, but not to size the equipment. So now we are considering the future weather file when it comes to the R values and the envelope of the building, because these are things that really will stay with us. However, it will not have an impact on performance, whether the weather is now not reaching those thresholds in the future. Like for example, if we talk about chillers, for example, and we say, how about like 2080, and we design the chillers and the equipment will be oversized, running with lower coefficient of performance, and leading to consume more energy, cost much. And by the time we reach 2080, the chiller will be dead anyway. So you need to replace it by a new one. So the focus from our side now is to consider the envelope when it comes to future weather, but not the equipment themselves.
Yeah, thank you. Hope you good. This guy's on mic.
Yeah. I'm just going to challenge the panel on one thing is leadership. We're talking about here fixing the hospitals and then making sure the new ones are at least at the top of the benchmarking chart. I want to go back to the leadership around Humber, CVH, and Peel Memorial as well, John, is if we hadn't had the Humber, we would have a different discussion right now. We would be comparing something else. Like at that point, it was challenging. All the industry challenged Humber. I heard the stories, but we have sort of PCL and Ellis Dons here that they were pushing back on those targets. They're saying we can't sort of make this is not possible. Cannot happen. Same thing with John. You had many conversations around Peel Memorial having geothermal systems. That was something unique that was put in there, but there was a leadership there to sort of make sure that happened. How do we make sure that we're not only sort of looking at the next step at Humber, but if we're missing something that could be built today, which is 20%, 30% more efficient than Humber, we're talking about here that leadership. Where's that going to come from? Like, who's going to be that leader that's going to say, well, I understand the constraints, but I'm going to make this through this? Because otherwise, we're getting ourselves complacent with competing with Humber, but not even considering there might be something we're leaving at the threshold. Now, we might find many reasons with that, which is capital. We might find other reasons, which Humber, Peel, CVH all had the same constraints, but they still delivered a better product, which wasn't existing at that time. But now we have something that exists. Can we beat it? And what sort of leadership we need to make sure that happens, that we don't come 10 years from now and say there's nothing exists better than Humber from now, because definitely we can do better than Humber.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic question. I think, part of the success with respect to Peel was about, from the moment of inception of we're going to build something, the notion that we were going to build the most energy efficient health facility in Ontario at the time was injected right into the sort of master planning stages of the project, so that, recognizing, we can't solve for all of the constraints up front. We can at least build the framework that provides some protection against that as a key piece of the vision, so that as you're moving through and you look at what this building has to be, it also has to be the most energy efficient health facility in Ontario when it opens. And so I think that, and then just hammering away through the phases to ensure you preserve that. I think that's maybe where it starts, but I'll let my learned colleagues weigh in as well.
Sure. Just to really go back to the comment on capital, and there was a comment about it not being our fault. certainly I didn't hear those words appear at all. I think it is all of our responsibilities. I think where does the leadership come from? I think it's in this room. I think all of the leaders are in this room. I think, and I can only speak for our own project, there is tremendous energy being expended right now to do the very best thing that we can do. To do new things that haven't been done before, to push the envelope in certain areas. There is political capital being expended. There is capital being expended. I certainly didn't mean to sit here and suggest that because we're not being handed a blank check, therefore we cannot do anything. That's not what's happening. I don't know if we're going to win on everything that we want. I don't think we're going to get everything we want. I think there are probably a lot more ideas on the table right now that our consultants and our development partner have put forth than we may be able to implement, at least in the immediate term. To your point, maybe the longer term, some of those things can be transitioned. But I do think it is a constraint. It is in our reality, capital is very much a constraint. But all of the leaders in this room pushing, having the conversations, even if the answer today is not exactly what we had hoped for, we started a conversation. We pushed a conversation. We educated ourselves. We educated others. So it is absolutely worthwhile. It is absolutely, I don't want to use the word fight, but it is absolutely the journey that we're all on and that we need to have. And again, even if we don't get everything we want this time, maybe we have made some progress, some incremental progress that the next project can leverage.
There's a question for you. Is the mic on? No.
There we go. Cliff, my question to you is that you did this visioning, wonderful visioning into 2080 with respect to energy. Did you consider how healthcare will be delivered in 2080, or were you just simply looking at the energy aspects of this?
It was, basically it was the energy. It was looking at what would happen to the building that we're building today. So it's, to your point, were we thinking what the healthcare system would look like? Not necessarily. I've said this many times at many conferences. Our hospitals aren't going anywhere. People say, well, we'll have healthcare at home. We have homeless people. There's so many. So that, and it's interesting because that's a question that we need to answer. But it was in relationship to what we're building today and how we prepare. So my response to the transition plan was we asked Project Co, how are you going to facilitate something in 2050? No, we're not asking you to put it in, but how would you facilitate it? What would be some of your suggestions? Just follow the plan. It only cost us the brain power and the dollars associated with the idea, but it didn't cost us any capital from that perspective.
So just to follow up to that, in terms of, I'm coming from the operations side and having dealt with large portfolios, I think we're sort of challenged to make our buildings the best we can given what we're given. So some of the operators don't necessarily have significant input into what we end up with. But again, I think the challenge for us is that whatever is created, whether it's new or something existing, what can we do collectively and sharing information as to how we can make it the best it can be in terms of energy efficiency. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of background. We could certainly look to lessons learned, and I sense that I think collectively we have we have that information that we could share. So.
Okay. So I think the question, and it sort of sat out here in our discussions beforehand, was really around the partnerships that you create to achieve your goals. And that goes partnerships early in the planning before even the contractor is thought about procurement from that perspective. So I think from the panel's position, how do you build up those, when we heard it earlier today too, how do you build up those relationships and understanding so that you can achieve your goals from that perspective? So what are the different, again, lessons learned? What were some of the things that you've done in the past to set the tone to get that achievement? And it might be engaging with the consultants in a particular way, getting reports, whatever it might be, so that you start to build up that story. I think that's maybe what the question is. So any thoughts about?
You can go first. Yeah. Oh, do you need this?
Yeah, no. I think I maybe alluded to it in my opening comments. It's really just, I think maybe following on your point is ensuring that you're remembering that we are not building icons, we're building vessels for care, and we're ultimately building facilitation for care. And it's the operations team that's ultimately going to make this building come to life. And so bringing operations into those, from those very early inception discussions so that they've bought in wholeheartedly to it at a vision level, have figured out exactly how they're going to operate. That iterative conversation around some of those operational challenges happens earlier in the design process versus, usually where it happens, which is post-construction and well into operations, where you're actually sort of navigating some of those things. So that's maybe the first thing I would say.
I'll add on the other end, because I think,
yeah.
So I'm going to also answer your question and try and do these two things at the same time. So in my experience, the most successful projects that I've worked on, the integration, like just speaking from the developer side, the design developer side, the earlier on we were all lined up and we were using the model and the energy problem to make decisions, the sooner, obviously, and this is sort of obvious to people, or should be, that the sooner you have those conversations and you use the model as a tool for decision making, the better. And that's like, I don't know how many years I've been getting up and mentioning that integrated design is a good idea. So I won't belabor that point. But I also will point out that the unique situation, especially in Canada and Ontario particularly, is that it ends up being the same people a lot of the time in the next project who are sitting around those tables as the next one, right? Very often, right? Whether it's in one table or another. And sometimes we switch tables. And so we can share a lot of information, and a lot of that's already happened. And I think that some people have already said this today, that the known approaches are pretty obvious, and they're a starting point. So the model gets better every time that we start from, the expectation. So now if we have that time to innovate, then we can use it to think about how the heat recovery chiller can be better, or how to add a water source heat pump this time, or how we can improve the zoning problem can get more effective. So that is super useful, and I think is the great success of what we've done. And that if there's leadership happening, it's that everyone's buying into making things better, as you said, incrementally. But the big changes need to happen faster. And I think that's the harder part, is we need that political will to ask for those bigger changes to happen faster, we need a bigger consensus on those bigger changes needing to happen faster. So, yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure, did you want to just...
I'm just going to add one small point, because I got asked this question in another panel with the C2P3 conference about, how do you build partnerships and how do you make sure you have a cohesive team? Sometimes you got to change a team member. Like sometimes it's not the person's bad or they're bad at their job, but they just don't click. And we've learned very early on in a couple of occasions, sometimes you just need to take a member out, move them, and move somebody else in who's going to click a little bit better. And that's just better for the overall project. That's the only point.
That's an excellent point. Other questions? Sorry.
Thank you. So I'm just going to quickly follow up on what you were talking about with leadership buying, right? Because most times when you see successful projects, there's buying from the top and it goes all the way down to the design and the operations, because from an organizational leadership perspective, there's already buying. So every step of the project or the organization, there's that buying already. But in a world where you have competing priorities, what's the biggest motivating factor to get that buying at the top?
Risk of repeating myself, our experience has been that getting that buy-in has not been a challenge. And so we're fortunate, and maybe it's just because it's becoming so much more obvious, every day that in our world that this needs to be a priority. It's perhaps not as difficult as it might have been 5 years ago to get that kind of engagement. So again, happily, we have that level of engagement. Again, still so many competing priorities, as you noted, on these projects, that even with that level of engagement, it's not smooth sailing after that. So I do think it's been noted a couple of times, but we're sort of mid-project, not quite in the ground yet. So already looking back on our planning, I dare say we've been at this for 10 years already. And was decarbonization the topic 10 years ago that it is today? Absolutely not. If we could have, 10 years ago made this a hallmark of our project, I think, Cliff, you made the point around, right away a master plan, master program. Would it have made a difference? I'm not sure, but it certainly would have been something, earlier on in the project that would have been elevated, had a higher profile in terms of a priority. But again, I feel like leaders are involved. Again, I've said leaders from the constructor side, from the consultant side, certainly from the hospital side, leaders are involved and engaged. I do think, again, having a long runway, there's a lot of authorities having jurisdiction when it comes to some of these projects and some of these technologies. And Cliff, I think, mentioned local utilities. Our local utility could not come anywhere close to providing enough power to fully electrify our hospital, even if we wanted to and could afford to, and all those things. Not particularly close. So those relationships are immensely complicated. It's not that anyone's disagreeing with anyone. It's that they're very complicated to set up. Those agreements are complicated to set up, particularly within the context of a DBFM, and they're even more complicated to set up. Hence my earlier comment around there are times where I would rather do this under the auspices of a more typical contract. But I think the more runway that you have to develop these relationships with your utilities, with your different levels of government that may have involvement, building these into the fabric of your project from the earliest days, I think all of that will be helpful. It's not going to be a panacea. It's not going to solve all your problems. It's not going to ensure that you get everything you want. But I would absolutely do that. And again, for us, what the world looked like 10 years ago and what it looks like now is a little bit different. So if we get to start all over again, then there's step one.
Maybe I'll just add in there, because I just want to go back to that comment about capital, because that capital problem is never going to go away unless we start understanding the true cost of these projects. So the issue is, most of the time we're talking about, and typical, everybody knows this, the engineers show up slightly behind the architecture. So if you look at the administrative process, we do a functional program, and then we start the design process, right? So all the space is there, and it's given a dollar square footage. But part of the issue is that, and it happened because of the P3 model coming in, that numbers weren't disclosed. We didn't see as much estimates coming in. So I'll say the projects that have been in the past 5-10 years have suffered under the fact is that the cost consultants out there don't know the true cost of these projects necessarily. So one of the things we could think about doing is doing a true estimate of the cost of construction for the mechanical and electrical systems in these buildings. And those are carried early in the construction phase. Because the issue is that when the cost consultants show up and they look at it, they go, oh, triple glaze, oh, this, oh, that's going to add more money to it. But like, wouldn't we start with a base that says, and to, I think the point, that if Humber is the number or the next number is this, what is the true cost of that? Right? So that later on, when we're doing the cost estimate before it goes out, somebody's like going, oh, this is going to cost more money. Then you go into value engineering. And I think that's the argument is you go, well, it's got a value to it. We should put it in. Yeah, but no, you have to go through cabinet. You have to get approvals. We got 50 other projects. And so I think one of the lessons learned is, and I don't think there is a cost consultant in here necessarily. I don't see a hand necessarily, but if you go talk to them, they're the first people who say, we don't really know what's happening in the industry. So if engineers are coming late into the process, they're the ones that are getting picked on. Because they're saying you can't take away a surgical unit. So benchmarking is absolutely key to the success of this. If we're talking capital being the issue, because capital does become the issue when you have to start saving money because you've got a budget here and now you're up here and you kind of bring it down. So my argument, lesson learned, and I think I've heard it from the panel, be early to the process, bring in your partners, make a big plan and execute that, but make sure you got the right capital costs in there. Because in theory, when you get it approved, I spent time with the Minister of Health, and I always said this, get the right number in. Because we don't sit there in the middle of the process and go, yeah, we said that much, but really, let's take out 50 million, right? It was like, no, we'll take that number, we'll take it all the way through the process. So I think that's one of the key. I've just been talking all the time, so that would get another question. So.
Can I add to that, sorry? And now I'll let you go. You absolutely have to respond first.
Well, just because I have to run out the door.
Oh, go ahead.
I have this, sorry, last minute board meeting came up that will cut my, just when, this is maybe slightly non sequitur, but you talk about, when we talk about this capital issue, and then you look at our health system and you look at the kinds of patients that we're seeing in the most expensive health infrastructure, the way that we build hospitals, and we continue to build bigger and bigger hospitals with no disrespect to my colleague Dave, the reality is it's a competitive process to try to get a project approved. And when we get our moment, we will push for everything we can possibly get from a capital perspective into that project. But if we take a step back and think about what health infrastructure are we actually investing in, and is it really right-sized or distributed across the continuum of care so that patients are actually receiving care within a capitally cost-optimized environment. So imagine a world where we don't have a 40% ALC rate in our hospitals or a 20% ALC rate, and we're actually seeing those patients in much less expensive infrastructure that then frees up capital to be able to actually build infrastructure that's actually carbon neutral. Anyway, just to...
And then I'll just piggyback by saying that I think when you're evaluating the capital up front, oh yeah, do you want to mic drop first, John? Thank you for, that's awesome. Do we want to applaud John for joining the panel first? So.
I thought I was supposed to ask you like a really hard offending question and then you were just going to get up and leave.
So I'll just beat on this drum a bit more. So then when you're also deciding what the capital is, you could use the same approach to thinking about the future capital or maybe some other facilities capital cost to achieve similar goals. And then you can turn that into a carbon cost that is true to your organization instead of using $50 a ton. So that's another way to value other kinds of capital in the process that aren't just the current facility construction cost. You can look at the transition plan cost and say, well, if we do it right now, it'll save us this much in energy cost versus doing it later, right? Or you can say, oh, in another facility that we've planned for, this is how much it costs to make this change to the equipment. And if we do it in our new construction to save the same amount of carbon, it would be cheaper. So we should actually make this decision. So you can look at not just the capital of that project, but of other future or other facility projects if you put that broader planning discussion together ahead of time. So you know that internal cost of carbon.
And I think that one of the things we talked about was benchmarks, like having the benchmarks, having the metrics, knowing what we're competing against or what we're actually, what's approved from that perspective that we can move forward. Value engineering is an interesting one because it does tie into exactly what we're talking about, because if it has a value, you can make the argument that it needs to stay, right? And my argument goes back. We shouldn't be having that argument in the middle of the design process because it's already been valued in from a cost perspective. But I would just sort of a lessons learned going into the project I'm working on. We're putting in a value engineering process for the program, not for the building, but for the program. And to John's point, which is we're phasing it into 3 different phases because we can't, lessons learned, build one massive building. So we're building 3 to make a massive building. And so the first phase, and we're saying $700 million for the first phase. What are we getting for it? Not saying we're going to keep building and then we're going to bring a price to it. It's capped at 7. So we have to do a value engineering for the functional program, because if we have to reduce the cost, it means reducing the project. So lessons learned, which I yet to actually experience, was a value engineering for functional programming. We're putting under the same strains that we're due from that perspective because we don't want to reduce the value of the infrastructure because we want to build everything we can. We can't build it all at once, so we have to do this. So that, to me, that was the lessons learned of going into this project is we have to also do value engineering on our own programs to make sure we get the right building. There's a question over here.
Yeah, just a comment. You all mentioned capital as, I guess, initial cost of the building. What I think is missing is the long-term operating cost, not just the energy side, but the life cycle. I think it's a very, it's shameful almost to build a P3 hospital with no LED in, and 2 years after operation, you put LED in. I think we know better. We know the operating costs, we know the life cycle costs, and it's wasteful. So I hope that we integrate more the long-term operating cost into the discussions, even at the ministry level, because there's really no incentive to do better and be challenging everyone. Second comments that didn't come up from an owner's perspective is all the clinical changes that are made right after the building operates, which system are not designed to entertain. Very expensive, difficult to do, great for the variations process, especially for the PICOs, but not so good for the owners and taxpayers in general. So I think if we could learn better and have lessons learned, I think we would all benefit from it.
That's a good point. I didn't think about the clinical changes. So, I mean, on the PICO side, I don't know. Yeah, variations are good. It adds money. It's terrible to do after the first year. Like, as a taxpayer, drives me crazy. Like, I just, you don't. And then also from an energy standpoint, we talked about zoning and whatever. As soon as you start making changes, you've now lost the original design intent, the original space plan, how the equipment operates. So I think sometimes you're correct, Savan, the changes get made kind of in isolation. Well, there's a new clinical manager or a new CEO or whatever that wants to make some changes and doesn't take into account, well, there was a lot of planning that went, 10 years of planning that went on beforehand that should have taken into account mechanical, electrical, and everything else involved. Yeah.
And that we've asked a little bit about leadership sort of in other other contexts. I think that's another area where hospital leadership really comes to the fore, is doing, and I think this is a subject for a whole other conference, but what can we do during the planning and design phase to try and limit the number of changes sort of post-construction? And again, leadership comes into play there too, right? There is a role for hospital leaders to say, we're not changing that. There was to quote a former CEO who made a comment to us early in our planning process, she said, of all the new physicians, of all the new medical staff that have onboarded at our current hospital in the last X number of years, and, guess how many have come to me and said, I have to leave, I can't work here because of the design. Of course, the answer is 0. So it's a bit of a simplistic comment, but there is definitely a leadership role to that. To your first comment, operating versus capital, we would love for there to be a better relationship between operating and capital. We can set up the best business cases in the world and engage our consultants to help us come up with very effective, very correct, very accurate business cases. At the end of the day, it doesn't always win, unfortunately.
Another question.
Hi, thank you very much. Just a quick question on the cost component. So I agree completely that costing is very important, especially from the onset. But what I found that it's not always that easy, depending on the nuance of the situation. So just for an example, take LEED, for example, right? Because so many of the credits can be based on where you're situated. If you want to calculate, say, a LEED uplift cost, that hasn't really been done well in the past. And say you want to raise your standards from LEED Silver to LEED Gold. The cost uplifting calculations have not been very well understood in the past. So just wondering if the panel has anything to say about that and any lessons learned or nuances you can share today about that.
I could say a lot about that. We deliver service to avoid that situation, arguably. So as early on as possible. So like the work should be, and we try and make this the work for our PDC work. So like a lot of the work I do, or even earlier during the master planning phase, if you can do it, like you should make those uplifts in quotes real and then embed them into the price that goes out so that it's not an uplift and someone can't see it as a line to delete in the, but you have to make them tangible. Even like there's a lot we know, as we've all agreed, about what a hospital will perform like and the kinds of technology that should be included in it and the associated costs. Right now, I mean, if we could all draw a sketch of it here without very much information for hospital X and have a pretty good price, if we just spend a little time to customize it early enough on, and a little time is maybe you do an energy model for that facility early, right? Maybe you develop some pricing for wastewater issues that's the second highest thing that'll contribute to the cost. Maybe you do spend a little time on future weather opportunities and add a little extra space allocation for bigger chiller. Like you pick those things out and you don't treat it like there's just some magical 6% uplift cost for lead. Like it doesn't make sense to do that. So do the planning well, come up with the right cost, do it like you're actually planning the hospital. That's the way I would say it. I mean, that's a bit trite, but you get what I'm saying, I think. Actually do the work, I think is the way to do it. So.
Dave, do you want to, yeah.
No, I don't think I have too much to add except your point around LEED Gold and different environments or different locations are different. I would say that applies very broadly to the hospitals. Cliff brought up functional programming. There's a whole other conference. I can't think of the number of times through functional programming that we were asked, what did Mackenzie do? What did Oakville do? What did Humber do? Comparing one hospital to the next, we now get that very same question, by the way, on energy and on decarbonization. What does Mackenzie do? What does Humber do? What does Oakville do? We recite it. Comparing one hospital to the next is very, very difficult, even to acute care hospitals that might even be sort of close to the same size. How they are oriented, the conditions of their site, are they more vertical or more horizontal? Get into endless conversations and arguments around the number of elevator shafts and how that contributes. So comparing whether we're at the functional program stage, comparing space, whether we're at the detailed design stage, and comparing energy and efficiency, this idea that we can sort of easily compare one to the next, and I'm not suggesting that we don't need to try. It's very complicated and difficult.
I think I've heard many times at different conferences. It's basically like we're all designing another car. We're not all designing a Ford, Mustang. We're literally designing kind of on the chassis, but not really, and then keep going. So it's hard to, I would go back on partly what I said, it's hard to estimate, but it's not, because the clarity that you want early in the process has to be in the documentation. Like it's basically the specifications, the guide that takes you to the next level, Shouldn't wait until you're in the middle of the process that start adding in the specifications. So the more we can do. And I'll say this, and you didn't hear it from me, but one of the things I think is most frustrating is that a lot of you are involved in the facilities management side aren't at the table. And you're not asked to be at the table, but you should be at the table, right? Amir was at the table when we were doing the South Niagara project because he had a ton of information and knowledge about the operations of St. Catharines and what he would like to see into this one. But he had a full-time job, so we had to pull him in from that perspective. So getting those early in the process is absolutely key. The second one is we don't have the money to do it. So talk about capital. And it's a really hard, now talk about leadership, your CFO and your CEO, making a commitment to borrow money to support the planning of the hospital because the ministry has yet not approved it or given you a planning grant to actually make any difference. Like a $5 million planning grant won't get you very far. So having that kind of leadership to say, no, we will actually fund this project, knowing that once it's approved, we will get that retroactive funding. And case in point, if you need a hospital in your community, you're going to get a hospital in the community. It may take 5 years, may take 10 years, it will take 10 years, even if you have a green light to go. So part of the lessons learned there is actually having that discussion that you need to be at the table, you need to participate at, lessons learned from that perspective, but there's also funding for it. And my argument about changes to functional program is that traditionally we've only hired maybe one person to do a functional program. Now, there's two. Yeah. Well, we've done a team. It's expensive, no doubt in my mind, but it pays itself off because you don't have those variations and changes. And we got a 20% increase to the functionality of it. To the comment here, if I looked at the numbers, 100% of the capital cost goes in. You look at the operating cost for a facility and it runs about 2 or 5% of the entire budget, 95 of it. 75% is salaried and the rest of it is supplies. Hospitals use a lot of supplies. So if you want to talk about decarbonization, there's another whole avenue there. So the argument behind that is, you know, if you want to find the real savings to this, is it improve the operation side of it, keep your staff, you know, here's one of the biggest problems that nobody ever talks about at a conference, but it shows up in every board report, every board meeting, every executive, staff retention, and how much money that is costing the system. So those are all the things that we're trying to solve here at the same time, creating a great environment. So Ian, sorry.
I loved where you were going with valuation and prioritization at the functional level rather than the infrastructure level. And Glenn, I hope you'll forgive me for this. I'd like to come back to your example of the famous control valves that were value engineered out, disabled the plant, and then had to be put back in after the fact, like the cost of getting it wrong. Would you mind elaborating a bit on that story?
So not getting into the specific dollar values of that, the control valves were removed by the design engineer who was working for the mechanical contractor on that job. They inhibited the operation of our heat recovery plant to the point that it basically couldn't run for more than about 4 hours without locking out on a fault, which obviously wasn't great for the energy consumption. Ellis Don was kind enough to come back in and have a contractor install those control valves, and overnight we saw the heat recovery. But at any rate, overnight we saw the heat recovery chiller performance jump drastically. And it was incredible, but it probably cost 5 times the amount to put those control valves in after the fact that it would have to do it during construction.
I was going to say, and I think your examples, specific control valves, I probably have 50 examples of similar things. Like maybe it's not energy, but it's something else. And so, you know, when we talk about lessons learned, it's not about that specific control valve. Is like what happened in the value engineering, what was the analysis that was done and what was missed to say, okay, but if we need them, you know, what's going to happen down the road. And I think back to the like facility management folks or the operations folks getting involved in those decisions and having their input, because chances are you've seen it before, right? And so making sure those things go through a full cycle and it's not just
it actually overrides the mic. That's cool. That's the way the AIT should work, or the announce. Anyway, okay, I'll keep going. I think I will put it out there, and I'm happy to have others disagree with me on this. But I think it is the guarantee process that motivates that bringing of the FM effectively into every project. I think that if we want to continue to have the success that we've seen and have more success, we shouldn't take the guarantee process out of our projects. I know there's people from CAMH here. So we're working on DBF projects where we took out the guarantee and where we pitched to the team, hey, these are some lighter ways that we could put it back in. But the challenge is a legal one now, right? When it's a DBF, you can't ask Project Co to operate. We should fix that. We should have a DBFG, right? Design, build, finance, guarantee, whatever that means, where there's a 5-year period or whatever, it's the bedding period, instead it's the vetting period, where we make sure that the handover is effective and that the targets that were set are achieved. So we can we can do a bunch of different models, but I think without the guarantee, we won't have the operator commitment that's needed to achieve the performance and do effective handover. So I would say a lesson learned for me is when that hasn't been there, it's easy for things to get eroded, and those valves would have stayed in because you left, right? That's, I think, a risk. So I think that guarantee creates the conditions for effective operator integration.
Hey, Tony, because you invited the disagreement, the jury is out. What the pain share, gain share does to the relationships. Like I got this lesson from your panel last year at the forum. What it does to relationships. Again, you don't start a 30-year marriage with a pain share, gain share agreement. You know, it's not going to go there. The best results we're seeing are generally when you have, you know, Miles has already told us, New Women's Hospital didn't have any pain share, gain share, had a different process for doing things, and had the relationships and the people in the right place at the right time. The degree to which gain share, pain share either improves or worsens the relationships, we think the jury's still out on that one.
Sure, and I'm not actually suggesting pain share, gain share. I'm just saying that there needs to be a group of people whose job it is to make sure the building meets the performance target that was set. So you don't need a 30-year payout model. It does. That's not. In fact, no one's going to want to get paid on the energy cost savings because it's not that good. You want to get paid on some other value or some other risk, right? So, and how that works out, and I feel like that's probably a bigger conversation that IO folks can facilitate. Is there a way to do this, you know, that makes sense? Is it IPD? Is it some other thing that makes, you know, where everyone's happy and we're all working together? It's probably going to work in that model. And that was suggested today, but I just think taking out the responsibility for the builder to help execute on performance after the fact is necessary. Cool. So whatever that is.
Paul, did you want to?
Yeah, and it's incentivizing. So first, I think the 30-year O&M part's very important. Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut it. I was just agreeing.
EFS, JCI plug, yeah. So, but I think there has to be an incentive, you're right, for the design build team to produce a building that meets whatever the model set or whatever the agreement is. And that doesn't have to be a pain share, gain share, but there has to be some motivation for everybody on the team to be focusing on that end target, you know, to be at the top of the list and better. And I think if you, as soon as you take that out in a DBF, you know, the builder, and not for any fault of their own, is going to focus on building the building. You know, putting the hole in the ground, putting the walls up, getting it done, doing it as fast as possible, as efficiently as possible. And so there needs to be that incentive to say, okay, but don't forget, you know, let's make sure we meet our energy obligations.
Just a quick comment on that. I think, I mean, pain share, gain share is one mechanism. There's many other mechanisms. Eventually, we might be at a point where this kind of goes back to the partnerships. We might be asking that question as if the hospitals are building and the partners comes in and say, show me your results. Like, show me in a hospital that you have delivered. That's a high performing hospital. Tell me which team are you bringing in. If you don't have the right partners, I'm not going to choose you because I have other partners that are delivering better hospital. So then the leadership is not just on the hospital side, it's also on the project side, project co-side, to make sure they are delivering high performance hospital, because eventually hospitals are going to start selecting the partners that are actually delivering those hospitals because they know that they deliver those hospitals. So that kind of goes back to who are your sort of key partners you're going to choose that will deliver to those. Like, I mean, pain share, gain share is one mechanism, but eventually we're going to sort of start selecting the teams that are delivering those hospitals, and then leadership is going to switch and everybody start to think we got to deliver these hospitals high performance, otherwise we're not in the business anymore.
I mean, I would say that IPD is what you just described. Right, like it's the process of selecting a preferred team and then working together to execute. So that's a model that's floated as being better in theory than, you know, and you could also add an operating component to that in theory. So it's not like it, but I think that like picking people based on their merits is one way of solving the problem of picking the right team. It simplifies a lot of things too, but it has some problems in terms of risk. So we're not here to debate all the models, though, I don't think.
No, I think the discussion is very relevant to the point where I think in the past, the model, and we're talking the FM component, because at the success of the projects that we've seen is the ability to continue to run the building and find the savings, find the efficiencies in the building from that point of view. But I think it's really important, and this is something, again, lessons learned that we don't really focus on, is early in the project is building the team on the project side. That is the design planning team. Because up to this point, you ask somebody who's the facility designer, who's the person responsible for facilities management at the functional programming stage, you're guaranteed probably not to find anybody, right? There, you'll have a facilities manager maybe representing doing everything, including the operations of the facility, but actually having somebody who understands that questions early in the process is key. And what we're missing, and I would really love it, again, lessons learned here, is an org chart of what a successful project team looks like. Because what happens is that the success of the project is based upon you having a team that can talk to the other team. The earliest models of the P3 model, and Amir might talk to this, or you could talk to him about it, is the fact is that it's okay, they're going to do it. They're going to look after it, right? And its truth is, and you think about the P3 model, particularly the early ones, it was run by the contractor. It was under a construction model, not a facilities management model. They added that one on. So when you think about it, you have to kind of rethink about this. And I think IPD is actually making sense because what you're doing, you're pulling it apart and bringing it earlier into the process. It still won't function well if you don't have it on your other side. You need to have that knowledge. And that brings up maybe just recognizing we have 10 minutes left to sort of wrap up lessons learned. I wanted to stress here the people aspect of it, because we have to move away, if we haven't done it already, from the transactional model to the relationship model and building up those partnerships from that perspective. So I'll let you, the panel, pick their own lessons learned from that point, and maybe just give us your one big takeaway from this discussion that the audience can take away and think about and mull around and come back with it. Antonio, you want to start?
Sure. I'll just sort of reiterate or sum up what I said at the start with some of the thoughts from within, that we should leverage to the best of our ability the complexity but opportunity of the new construction process to benefit our broader portfolio and the kind of thinking and operational changes that are needed to achieve zero carbon and these sort of longer term goals that we have in front of us. And I would say that a lot of the things that I learned today are about which things to put in the early parts, the decision making with the broader folks, and then which parts are interconnected, like which parts bridge between the design construct work and the planning work, and then which parts are operational, and how to bring people in who represent each of those things and have that really continuous transition of those goals all the way through. I think that's something that I would advocate for, is to see the bigger picture as an organization and make sure you have people all the way along that process, connecting each phase and hopefully looping it back in for lessons learned. So.
Excellent. David.
It feels like a lot of pressure to come up with a single lesson learned. I think, one thread, Cliff, Anthony, you both touched on it. I think the earlier you can embed these things, whatever these things are, your initiatives, your priorities, the earlier you can embed them in your project, the greater the chances, the likelihood that you'll be able to hold on to them. It's absolutely not a guarantee. Value engineering can come down to the very last minute, the 11th hour, and things can fall off the table. But to the extent that your project can embrace and sort of weave into the fabric of the project the things that are most important to you early on, I think it's a significant help in terms of being able to, again, hold on to them through some of the rough ride that will undoubtedly come prior to financial close or contract execution. Again, our experience on the people side, and perhaps this wasn't the experience 5 and 10 years ago, but has been very positive. Bit of a broken record, and maybe this makes for an uninteresting point, but we've had great success in terms of the alignment of people all wanting to do the right thing. Engineers, many of you are probably here in the room, don't always agree on exactly what the right thing is. Some debate around this technology versus that technology, but you're all generally wanting to go in the same direction. And so again, we've had great alignment between consultants, developers, staff, and members of the public, members of our community. Again, that might not have been the the experience early on, but that's certainly been our experience most recently.
Probably the biggest takeaway for me is, and lesson learned for me too, is the early planning. So I think, Cliff, you talked about it. Obviously, I haven't been involved in the 10 years prior, but the early planning is so important to spend the time on it. That's clinical programming, getting that correct, so we're not doing variations later and moving things around. I think the energy modeling doesn't happen early enough. Getting the energy model correct, because you don't get the energy model correct, your design is incorrect, and then you're going to build a building that's not correct, and changing that after the fact is very costly and very disruptive. So early planning, resourcing that properly. Appreciate the O&M upfront, Cliff. Like, I think, you know, the people we help or support or consult with who are doing DBFs or maybe just a typical construction contract, and they just don't have the facility management capacity to spend the time on the project. Those that can free up some money to bring in some experts to at least represent them, you know, it goes a long way. You make sure you get the design that you can operate. So early planning, I think, is the big one.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It's been an excellent panel. I thought it was interesting because we started the day with vision, planning, and design, and we talked about what went right and what happened. And I think a lot of the discussion today is reemphasizing what they've done right from that perspective, but also saying some of the barriers that we have. And hopefully you've been able to take away a few things that carry off. My last lessons learned based on value engineering is what you do is you take 5 useless things, bury them deep within the project. And when somebody says we have to take out X million dollars, if we have to, we'll get rid of these 5 things. And goes, oh, you're so good. So that's my lessons learned, but let's hear it for the panel and their time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, panel. Thank you, Cliff, and you heard it here first. So let's decided to freeze up again. Let's see if this one works. Yeah. So thanks for sticking this out. This, I would say this is the largest percentage retention rate we've had at the end of one of these conferences anyway. And I appreciate it because, again, this is not a, oh, I picked up 75%. I'm going to do the best job I can and not live up to what we've heard from the panels to try to pull some of this together in terms of call to action. Like, this is not just insight and understanding and learnings and experience that people are sharing with us. We all have a role in how this turns out from here. And the call to action really is hopefully that everybody in this room will leave here today and reflect this evening over a glass of wine or whatever you want to do on what can I do tomorrow to make a difference? Because if we go back to the beginning, the process now is broken. We have an 80% failure rate. I believe I would agree with what people have said. Your Cliff's commented this. The more recent projects are doing better than some of the older ones, but there's still more recent projects that are doing really, really badly. And it's the same all over North America. So the fact we're talking about change, it's not kind of understanding a business as usual. So let's spend a moment talking about what a call to action looks like. And we always like to start with the why. For me, there's been a number of amazing keynote addresses that Greening Healthcare has had the privilege of hosting at our forums, at our in-person workshops over the years. Dr. Penny Ballum was our keynote last year. She's the chair of the board of Vancouver Coastal Health, former city manager of the city of Vancouver, former deputy minister of health. Not a person given to hyperbole or dramatization. And Dr. Ballum titled her talk, Running Out of Time. And she spoke from the heart about the experience she felt when she watched Kelowna burning, which is one of those 3 pictures. The one on the right-hand side, that's the reservoir that used to be there that is disappearing very fast. So just want to kind of, if you like, close the day by coming back to what we're dealing with is very real. The climate crisis is very real. It has real world impacts. It is and will kill more people than COVID ever did. And we have a chance to contribute. We have a chance to make a difference. And we're talking today about, if you like, the piece of the piece that each of us can put on the line here. But Dr. Ballam's running out of time. The recording is up on the Greening Healthcare website. And again, if you're inclined at the end of a day like today, which I am, to kind of unwind with a glass of wine, it's a very good 30-minute listen. It's touching, it's compelling, and it gives us a sense that this stuff really matters. This is not theoretical, this is real world implications. And I make no apology for the repetition. You will see this slide in half of the webinars and the workshops that Greening Healthcare does. And it's a core message that we want to leave with everybody. There is urgency around this. 2030 is coming. 2030 is our first serious global commitment to greenhouse gas emissions reductions. It's only now 6 years away. And if we miss 2030, the chances of getting the 2040 targets are relatively low. The chances of getting to net zero by 2050 are impossible. We've been talking about this for years now, and urgency is saying now is the time to act. A call to action is saying we can't put this off any longer. There can't be any other priorities. David was good enough to remind us of what our children, our grandchildren, I have both, are going to ask of us. What did you do during the climate crisis? Mum, Dad, whoever. We owe it to them to get this right, and we've got to get on with it now. And I know we're busy, and we're still recovering from COVID. All those things are happening, but we have to get on with this. We can't delay this any longer because we are running out of time. So urgency is one thing. Opportunity should be the upbeat part of this. What a privilege to be where we are at this time when this matters so much. A lot of people don't have the fortune of, at some point in their career or in their lives, doing something that is really meaningful. This is meaningful, and we have the chance to contribute. And the opportunity is, it's going to make us feel good. It's going to put us in a good position going forward. So I'm trying to make the case, as a number of us have tried to make cases today, that the opportunity is there, and we have that responsibility. It's always, if it's the right thing to do and we can, we must. That's responsibility. If it's the right thing to do and we can do it, then we must do it. So you can read the words as climate change, the climate crisis is the defining issue of our time. It's driving the energy transition, which is the biggest transition in the history of humankind. We're going to see us going from 3 big old steam boilers in the corner clunking away through pressure reducing valves and steam hissing everywhere, to the sophisticated stuff that Jason and others have been talking about today. Heat recovery chillers whirring away, recovering heat that we used to throw to the atmosphere and using it to reheat the building. So all of that is going on, but the idea, it is the defining issue. I'm not going to repeat myself there, but it disproportionately affects the healthcare sector for exactly the reasons David mentioned this morning. One is your large emitters, and we're only talking about hospital facilities here because that's what we do, that's what we can do, that's what we know. But the healthcare system is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, and as such, it has that responsibility. On the other side, you don't want all those respiratory cases, you don't want all those casualties coming in from the front lines of tackling floods and fires. And let's not even talk right now about mass migration because it's coming. We think we got a border problem now. The people at the border causing the problem, they're the most wretched, desperate people in the world who have no place else to go because we did it to them over the past 200 years. So migration is coming. Again, I won't get into that. We could have a separate conversation, but we watch the trends in terms of what's happening with the climate crisis. It's very real and it's accelerating and it's serious. This is not an abstract idea. Everybody has the best intentions. There's nobody in this room that willfully is not trying to do the best to make facilities as efficient as they can be. Governments need to get re-elected. but they want to do the right thing as well. But despite all of that, the system isn't working, and greenhouse gas emissions associated with hospital operations in North America are continuing to trend up, when Canada's plan says they should be down by 41% compared to 2019 in 2030. So we got that far to go, but we're going upwards. So it becomes sharper and sharper, bending the curve every year. We're missing the mark by a long way, and we need to act. And it comes down to our level, and that's item 3 is you think globally. But government, Dr. Ballum expressed this really well. Government can't fix this. What do they got? They got taxes, they got grants, and they got building codes. That's all they got. And they can set targets, but we have to deliver on those targets. We is all there is. We're the front line, we're at the front line of the battle and going through that. So I know you all believe this, and honestly, I hate to preach, but we got to get on with this, and we got to get on with it now. And this is what preoccupies us all the time. So our call to action looks a bit like this. Awareness is first. Everybody in this room is directly and personally involved with a bunch of hospitals, with a bunch of new hospitals. If you don't know where they rank on the chart that we showed up there, you need to. So step 1 is you need to know how your hospitals turned out. And if you don't know that, it's almost like raising a child and then pushing it out the door. And I wonder how they turned out. These are your children. You put your heart and soul into these things for 5, 7 years. You need to know how they turned out. We can tell you. Like Greening Healthcare is here to help. So if you have a hospital that's not on that chart or that you don't know which one it is, call Michael and we'll find the data for you. And we'll tell you where you rank. And once you know, raise the collective awareness. Call the team. It's like getting back to the Magnificent Seven, calling them back into action. I guess probably most of you don't remember the Magnificent Seven, but I certainly do. It used to frighten me when I was a kid. But collective awareness, get the team informed and aware of how your project turned out and start the conversation about, let's fix this, and we're proposing, let's fix it by 2030. 2030 is that magic moment. What if we could take that whole chart and come back here in 2030 and show you every one of those hospitals at the top? Because technically, it's completely achievable. Financially, it makes huge sense. We talked about $34 million a year that we're wasting. And from an emissions standpoint, if we could do that across 37 hospitals, we would change the world. We would spread that word far and wide to every corner of the earth, and they would all say, wow. They're already saying, wow, by the way. What's Ontario doing? Because of Cortellucci Vaughan, because of Humber River, because of Peel Memorial, because of St. Joseph's in Hamilton. Like, we've already got their attention. If we could pull that off, what a coup. World-changing, which is what the world needs right now. So raise collective awareness, talk to each other, pick up the phone tomorrow morning, start calling people and say, do you know how a hospital turned out? This X, Y, Z, whichever one it is. And if not, let's call Michael and we'll find out. And then let's figure out what we can do about it by 2030. Put the work in together. And I loved, one of the insights I got today was that it's a team approach to this. You can't do it individually, but somebody has to be the leader. So somebody mentioned the idea of who's the energy performance officer in each one of the who takes the lead? Who's going to make sure all the pieces kind of fall in together? Because if we have 10, 20 of those people, they can save $34 million a year, and financially it makes all kinds of sense. And finally, this idea, the 2030 challenge, we're starting to use that terminology. The collective commitment that we're going to get our hospital to the top of that chart. And we hope everybody else will too, but we'll take ownership of our own. But that's what we're referring to as the call to action from coming out of here today, that everybody does something differently than they did before. Greening Healthcare is here to help with all of that stuff. Again, we've got data, we've got analytics, we can point you in the right direction. We've got our 12 favorite measures. We got all kinds of stuff. There's all kinds of resources on our website. We want to help you get there. We want to hear from you. If Greening Healthcare membership feels like a good idea, and this is blatant kind of recruitment, love to have hospitals on board. The program's growing. We have more industry members who we treasure. We've got more hospitals from all over North America taking part in the program now. Good time to join us. So that becomes a key message. Upcoming events, we've got the webinar coming up on September the 25th. Our friends from Blackstone are in the corner here. They have a great case study of how do you take an older hospital, what Tony was mentioning earlier, how do you take an older hospital and decarbonize it, bring it up to the top end of that benchmarking chart. And we'll have 3 or 4 case studies there because it's always nice to hear success stories. Like this is a bit doom and gloomy today because we've got a lot of work to do, but success stories are good because they excite us all, they encourage us all. So take note of the webinar. If you're here, Kelly's got your number. You can't escape. You can always unsubscribe if you wish to, but you'll hear about all events coming up. But we've got the webinar coming up, and we've got the Greening Healthcare Forum, which is our, again, in person. It's our big strategic event of the year. It's where we have people like Dr. Penny Ballum talking about why this matters from the C-suite. And we have executive panels getting together to take the real challenges, not just for new hospitals, but for all hospitals, for the whole hospital sector moving it forward. The forum this year is at the Delta Hotel, November the 4th. Be there, be square. But this is our preparing for 2025. What's going to come next year? What are the priorities? And how can we work our way through that? Reminding, I'm Ian Jarvis, the Executive Director of Climate Challenge Network. Heather Bell is at our table there at Climate Challenge Network table with Michael Pagel, who's the program manager. And if you're a member of Greening Healthcare, you know Michael already because you're probably calling him every 2 weeks. And you've heard a few times from Amandeep today. In my view, the most broad-minded, knowledgeable hospital energy engineer that we're aware of. We're honored to have him as part of our team. We're available to give you a hand. So thank you for coming. If you've signed up for the site tour, please collect if you can gather by Heather and Michael, raise your hands over there. So if you gather there, and then our friends from JCI will be figuring out how to break you up into the appropriate groups so that you can get the most out of the value of the day. Once again, thank you for sticking it out. Thank you for being here. Thank you for hearing the story. And thank you for what you're going to do starting tomorrow to make a real difference. Have a great day.